Oklahoma Military Academy, the west point of the Southwest, situated as it is 200 feet above the city.
Attending OMA meant you got core values.
Everybody's experience is a little different here, but the end result is the same, that they love this place, they love the people they were here with.
This is a very special place, very special relationships.
I think the most important things that I've learned as I reflect over the years was leadership and loyalty and courage.
This detail of old cadets initiates the new cadet into the military life he is to lead at OMA.
This school is my home.
My life, it is what it is today because of OMA.
The school on the hill in Claremore, Oklahoma carries a different name now, as well as a different mission. Decades ago, Oklahoma Military Academy, known as the West Point of the Southwest, gave way to what is now Rogers State University. But the heart of OMA still beats on this hill. And the former cadets, though their ranks are thinning, still return each year. Return and remember. A visitor doesn't have to look very hard to find evidence of OMA on the RSU campus. The former Meyer Barracks, for instance, is now an administration building that also houses a museum devoted to the academy. While outside the hall, the Oklahoma Military Academy KIA Memorial reminds visitors of the cadet lives taken by war.
You fall in love with a piece of ground, in a way, and all that it represents. You walk by that KIA Memorial, and you'll come back down to earth, and particularly when you were so close to so many of those guys. I live for the reunions.
Our numbers are dwindling, and there are men dying every day, and it just breaks my heart. But these are honorable men, and the memorial that we have tried to think many, many things that we could have here in OMA. That will live on, and that means so much. And we want to honor those men, and obviously the guys that served.
This is Preparatory Hall, the very first building on the OMA campus. In fact, it predates the academy, having been completed in 1912 as the headquarters of Eastern University Preparatory School. After that two-year institution died in 1917, this building became the temporary headquarters for Claremore High School. Then, on March 10, 1919, just a few months after the World War I armistice was declared, Oklahoma Governor J.A.B. Robertson signed a bill establishing Oklahoma Military Academy. 1919 was a good time to be opening a military school. With the World War just ended, the country was not only full of patriotism, but was also aware of the need for military training, just in case another international conflict arose. So in the spring of 1919, the man who'd become OMA's first president, S.M. Barrett, traveled to Washington, D.C. He got approval for the planned school to be a Junior Reserve Officers Training Corps Center, ROTC, which provided military training at educational institutions. It was a program that had only been around for a few years. By autumn of that same year, 60 high school-age cadets had signed on as OMA's first students, and they didn't have it easy.
Well, that first winter, it was
you know, snowy, rainy, wet, very uncomfortable. So all I can say is that it was miserable.
In February 1920, an imposing figure visited the brand new military academy, calling on his old acquaintance, Colonel Barrett. It was former President William Howard Taft, who spent a day on the Hill, going over rules and regulations with Barrett and giving a speech to the cadets. A visit from the recent President of the United States was important, but even more important to the cadets was the construction of OMA's first barracks, which was completed a month after Taft's visit. Facing the chill of an early Oklahoma spring, the cadets gratefully folded their tents and moved into their brand new barracks. Although life was still tough for the boys on the Hill, they now at least had a roof over their heads at night and sturdy walls to keep out the cold. Meyer Barracks was named after a World War I hero from Oklahoma, Sergeant Maurice Meyer, who'd been mortally wounded in France late in 1918. The barracks became the second building on the OMA campus. Throughout the 1920s, Oklahoma Military Academy grew both in its cadet population and in the amount of instruction it was able to offer. By the fall of 1922, enrollment had increased to 125, and a first year of junior college was added to the high school. A year later, OMA added a second junior college year, which meant that a young man could now attend the academy from age 14 to age 20. The efforts of State Representative H. Tom Kite, often called the father of OMA, and OMA President Barrett did much to spur this early growth, which continued even after Colonel Barrett resigned in 1924, citing personal reasons. He was replaced by Colonel Walter E. Downs.
Colonel Downs had 2 degrees, one in literature and one in the arts. But he was also Colonel Downs of the National Guard, Oklahoma National Guard. He had a tendency to model the curriculum after West Point.
He was also a no-nonsense guy, as we can see by his words in the 1927 OMA yearbook. The primary lesson for the future citizen of democracy is self-control, and that is achieved only through discipline. Regular hours of study, for military drill, for student activities, for sleep and regular well-balanced meals result in broad shoulders, erect posture of body, deep chest, elastic step, alert mind, open, honest face, and fearless, frank eye. By 1928, the school had added a second barracks for the swelling population of cadets. The new building was named for Major General Baird H. Markham, a member of OMA's Board of Regents and founder of the Oklahoma National Guard. Soon after taking over, Colonel Downs instituted his version of the New Man system, a staple of almost all military schools. The system was designed to make sure new candidates made a thorough transition from civilian to military life. On the Hill, these rookie cadets were called Rabbits, a name that stuck with them as long as OMA stood. And while Colonel Downs didn't believe in hazing, the year-long rabbit period was arduous at best.
To tell you the truth, they didn't start calling you a rabbit to start with, they called you a rat. And you more or less felt that that was about right.
I had gotten in trouble with some of the older cadets when I was a rabbit, and one of them particularly didn't like me, so he beat me pretty badly one time. I mean, really, he put a blood blister on me about 1/4 of an inch thick. A few weeks later, I found a dead rattlesnake out in the fields, and I slipped it in and put it into his bed one night. The next thing I knew, I heard a scream. He almost died. I got even. He knew who did it, but he couldn't prove it and couldn't do anything about it.
Although that sort of extracurricular activity was certainly not sanctioned, Colonel Downs made sure there were other things for his charges to do outside of class.
They were encouraged to be part of the athletics, whether it was football or baseball or track or the glee club or the drill team or the rifle team, all sorts of things.
I liked the sports so much that I participated in them as much as I could.
OMA offered the musically inclined opportunities to be in a marching band and orchestra, which both began receiving accolades in the 1930s.
Captain Kelly was the director. I thought he was great, and we had not only marching band, we had a symphony band. We gave concerts. We went to Dallas for the tricentennial in 1936 and played on national radio.
The Oklahoma Military Academy, the West Point of the Southwest, situated as it is 200 feet above the city, dominates the surrounding terrain just as it dominates the military academies in the state.
OMA prospered during Colonel Downs' tenure on the Hill. The Sabre Society, a fraternity for cadet officers, came along in 1927, followed by the Chevron Society, the non-com officers fraternity, in 1932. That was also the year OMA became one of only 3 junior colleges in the nation to be designated an honors school.
The report of Fire Board from Washington, who with the Academy staff make their annual inspection to see if the Oklahoma Military Academy shall again be rated as one of the 20 honor military schools of the United States, a rating it has held for a long time. We hope these fine young men will never be in a war, but if they are, with this kind of training, they'll know what will afford them protection from either the enemy or the weather.
Colonel Downs also landed an ROTC cavalry program for OMA.
Of only 11 mounted units of ROTC in America, 8 are in senior colleges. The Oklahoma Military Academy is one of the 3 junior colleges having such units.
With the help of several political figures, including longtime OMA champion H. Tom Kite and United States Secretary of War Patrick J. Hurley, an Oklahoma native, Colonel Downs convinced the government to send 60 horses and 11 enlisted men to Claremore from Oregon, where a cavalry unit was being disbanded. Among those impressed by OMA's mounted cavalry was a youngster named Ed Ramsey.
When I was younger, I was a little on the rambunctious side, and I was pretty close to being a juvenile delinquent. And my mother, my father was dead, and she had to work, so she knew I loved horses. And so she baited the hook by asking me, "Dude, you're interested in horses, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes." She said, "You know, there's a cavalry unit at the Oklahoma Military Academy. Would you be interested in going?" And I snapped it up in a hurry. And that's how I came here.
Well, we had Sergeant Funk. I'll never forget Sergeant Funk. And he was in charge of horsemanship. I had a mare called Bridget. We had parades on Sunday, and you had to practice for those parades.
The cavalry program gave birth to a polo team, the OMA Flying Cadets, that would win a national championship in 1938. A few years earlier, the Flying Cadets had attracted the attention of OMA booster and favorite Claremore son, Will Rogers, who was then one of the top movie actors and political commentators in the country. In December of 1934, he financed a team trip by rail to California, where the Flying Cadets beat the mighty Stanford University squad twice in a row before an audience studded with Hollywood celebrities.
On the polo field, we have the pleasure of meeting the Academy polo team. This team is the same Oklahoma Military Academy team which won the coveted Will Rogers Trophy by defeating Leland Stanford University.
Will Rogers' cousin, Dr. Jesse Bushyhead, had been the boy's chaperone on that West Coast junket. It might have become an annual event, if not for Rogers' shocking death in a plane crash the next August. That same year, 1935, OMA honored the late Rogers by breaking ground on an auditorium that would bear his name.
The most imposing structure on Military Hill is Will Rogers Auditorium. It contains the offices of the Commandant, the Post Exchange, canteen, recreation room, barber shop, and music practice rooms.
It still stands today. Oklahoma Military Academy had begun just after the war to end all wars, when all America could see the value of military training to the nation's security. Now the unthinkable had happened, and America's young people were called once again to defend their country in a deadly international conflict. World War II took an immediate toll on Oklahoma Military Academy, and no one was immune.
President at that time was Colonel Walter Downs. And he had a son who was Walter Downs Jr., who was a good friend of mine. And I know he was killed in the service. He was a captain in armor.
In 1961, Walter E. Downs Jr. became the only former cadet to have a building on campus named after him, the newly constructed Downs Barracks. By late 1942, OMA had converted to a 12-month school year, the better to address the Allies' critical need for young officers.
We went to school 42 months straight. We didn't take breaks back then because we were in a hurry to get to the military.
By that time, Colonel Downs was gone. Collateral damage in another kind of conflict, a political war between Oklahoma Governor Leon C. Phillips and OMA's benefactor, State Representative Tom Kite. He would be succeeded first by West Point graduate Lieutenant Colonel Richard E. Anderson, who barely lasted a semester, Captain John C. Hamilton, and then Colonel Kenneth S. Perkins. The latter two men would run OMA throughout the war. Between them, Hamilton and Perkins took the academy through the years of intense training during World War II. Even before the war brought year-round military training on the Hill, two cadets rose from the ranks to distinguish themselves as career officers. Ed Ramsey, a 1935 graduate of OMA, gained fame for his bravery in leading a Filipino guerrilla army against the Japanese.
As I got to the village of Morone, they fired on my point, the four men that I had in front of me, and I went into dismount as foragers, which is a cavalry charged through the village, took the village, and held it until the others came in. And it turned out that that became the last cavalry charge in the history of the United States Army.
William E. Potts of OMA's 1941 class went on to serve in 3 wars, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, on his way to becoming a 3-star general, the highest-ranking former cadet in the history of the school.
I remember Colonel Potts. He wasn't in my class, but he was the colonel. He was the cadet colonel, and it wouldn't make any difference what he was. He had a wonderful way about him. He had a truly organized mind. He was a disciplined individual, and he was everything that I wasn't. And I guess maybe I liked him best because I'd kind of like to have been like him, you know.
Others may not have made the military their careers, but a full 80% of them heeded their country's call.
I found myself in Europe as a platoon leader in the 3rd Armored Division. We marched down this valley until we jumped their outpost. When we jumped their outpost, I had already told to take a right flank and go immediately to the top of the hill and start marching back. We no sooner got up on the ridge of the hill than all hell broke loose in the valley. Artillery, felling trees, smoke, thunder. You know, people talk about bravery, but bravery is just doing your job under fire.
Probably the most complicated and worst engagement we had was at Peleliu, and they took us into the reef, and the reef was about 300 or 400 yards further in, and the reef is rough as the devil, and you had to walk in and carry your equipment with you, and that was my business to lead them in, and I did it because, damn it, I was supposed to. This artillery shell hit this corpsman right on the head. He just disappeared. And I spent a lot of time thinking about what I was going to tell his mother.
The most unusual wartime contribution from a former OMA cadet was made by Dallas Meade, class of 1928, who hand-lettered the Instrument of Surrender, signed by General Douglas MacArthur, which effectively ended World War II. Even in wartime and with an accelerated course of study, OMA maintained the traditions established years earlier, including a commitment to extracurricular activities.
It was required that all cadets qualify in boxing, swimming, and wrestling. And that meant you basically that you put on 16-ounce gloves and pounded your old buddy for a few rounds until you became qualified in boxing.
And the ROTC Cavalry Unit continued as well, although the glory days of the polo team were over.
Polo was reduced strongly with the war, so we didn't get to go to meets against Culver and so forth.
Here we are in Claremore, Oklahoma, where the entire countryside has turned out to do honor to their favorite son, Will Rogers, in an annual sports classic and polo match.
We played here, we played in Mohawk Park in Tulsa. We were strong in our own little way. We rode hard, and we were all good horsemen.
Still, seeing the cadets drill team astride their mounts was an experience many locals would never forget. And that cavalry unit may have served as a subtle recruiting tool as well.
They used to ride their horses down the hill. This was back in the 40s. And I would stand out in the front yard and watch them. I thought that was the greatest thing ever.
Of course, the town kids didn't know what the cadets knew about their noble steeds.
OMA received the remounts from Fort Reno, which is the last cavalry station. But there were two crazy horses, Keys and AAA. And they were very knowledgeable. They could get the bit in their mouth and then just spit it out. There'd be no control over them when they heard the bugle during the charge. And we would line up outside the stables and march down to each stall. And we'd take a left and right face. Whatever stall we were facing was the horse we'd draw. And we'd try to angle for position to avoid Keys and AAA because we knew it'd be a bad day.
I had fun sometimes on a Sunday when we would go out, catch the horses, which were running loose, and mount them bareback and ride them. That to me, that was the biggest part of the ROTC was the horses. I loved it.
That was a very tall, thin, 6'6" cavalry sergeant, old time, tough as leather, and he spoke very slowly. He said, "Now, gentlemen, he said, you have to be careful with the rear leg and the rear hoof." He said, "Now I'm going to demonstrate to you the perfect way to do it." And he gets up under the horse. The horse hauls off and kicks him flying through the air about 6 feet. He's back on his back and he sits up and says, "Now I've just demonstrated to you an improper method of cleaning the horse's hoof."
Another tradition, far less amusing to the rookie cadets known as rabbits, also continued.
It is during his first semester that he learns to discipline himself to the demands of a system designed to operate in the best interest of the Corps as a whole. He learns to take and execute orders, a part of the training without the mastery of which he realizes he can never be capable of giving orders and having them executed.
That's weeks of intense accountability you kind of start out as nothing. It's an equalizer. Everybody comes in. It doesn't matter how you look or how smart you are or anything. That great common denominator is now all of you have shaved heads. You're in ill-fitting fatigues that don't look good at all, and you're just kind of running around the campus like a chicken with its head cut off trying to figure out what's going on.
Actually, believe it or not, I kind of enjoyed it. It was fun. It was fun trying to outsmart the upperclassmen and beat them at their own game.
Among the physical and psychological challenges faced by the rabbits was a ritual known as thinning out.
You put your back up against the wall, and then you slid down to where your pressure was on your knees, and you held your arms out straight ahead of you. You pulled your chin. Of course, I've got several to pull now. You pull your chin back to the back of your neck and just stay in that position as a rabbit, while the upperclassmen would sort of educate you on the worthless nature that you had and how miserable and low-life human beings you were. And you do that as long as they wanted you to.
But even cadets who successfully made it through the rabbit period weren't exempt from physical discipline. In the 1940s, those who erred often had to spend chunks of time and energy walking the bull ring. An entry in the 1943 Rabbit Manual explained the bull ring. Bull ring, that oblong path upon which members of the Corps who have deviated from the rules and regulations are requested to pace and muse over their many sins.
Every demerit you got, as I remember, you had to go walk it off on the bull ring. And there was several of us that needed the exercise, I suppose, so we were constantly on that bull ring every weekend.
Dale Robertson survived the bull ring, as well as World War II's European theater, where he was wounded twice and received bronze and silver stars to become one of OMA's most famous alumni. Although he's best known as the star of the Golden Age television series Tales of Wells Fargo, The Iron Horse, and Death Valley Days, Robertson also made his mark on the big screen.
But the one I had the most fun making was The Son of Sinbad, that I made it as a favor to Howard Hughes. It was a friend of mine, and I swear I never had so much fun making a motion picture. One, I didn't belong in it. Can you imagine this accent, playing the part of a Persian sailor? I'm doing lines like I had a scene there in the beginning with Lily St. Cyr where she's in the bathtub. Pretty risque there, but the water was all blue. Couldn't see nothing. And she had a bathing suit on anyway. But I jumped through that window and get up there and kneel down. I'd say, my jewel above price. The 7 moons borrow the light from the radiance of thy face. Come away with me, be my emerald star, to ignite the skies of Indus. Now, that just rolls right off of my tongue, doesn't it? I mean, it's just me all the way.
We had Dale Robinson come back, and he showed a premiere of his movie, Lydia Bailey. And Dale comes driving up here in a big old yellow convertible with a couple of German police dogs, and God must have weighed 150 pounds apiece. I thought he was the coolest guy I ever saw in my life.
Although OMA didn't produce any other motion picture stars, it did produce some motion pictures. In the late 1940s, the school sponsored this short film designed as a recruiting tool. It opened with a scene featuring new OMA President Colonel Homer Ledbetter. And while he was no Dale Robertson in the dramatics department, he gave it his all.
Yes? Gerald, what can I do for you? Well, Captain Ledbetter, we've been asked to tell a story for a film called Americanism in Action. Do you think our Corps of Cadets could supply such a story?
Gerald, you could tell this story. How would you go about doing it?
Well, Captain, I'd certainly enjoy telling the story of OMA. And I think I'd start by bringing to life our yearbook.
Colonel Ledbetter was a man who knew the value of publicity, and it was a good thing. During and after the war, OMA's cadet population had dropped steadily. An unending stream of Ledbetter public appearances and newspaper interviews helped reverse that trend. With the 1950s on the horizon, other major changes came to the Hill. One of the biggest happened in 1947, when the mounted unit was replaced with armored cavalry. After World War II, the government had dissolved every remaining ROTC cavalry unit in the country. And that's how the 1940s ended at OMA, with the sound of hoofbeats giving way to the roar of tanks.
There were old tanks, at least certainly by today's standards. At the time they were, as I recall, M4A3 E8s, but don't hold my feet to the fire on that. But part of the military science courses involved a course in tank driving.
With the dawning of the 50s came another war, influencing more young men to consider enrolling at OMA.
I came to OMA because there was a war on at the time, the Korean War. World War II had ended. The draft was still on, and my parents decided that if we were going to be at war, you ought to be an officer because you'd have a better chance to survive.
Meanwhile, many former cadets became involved in the Korean conflict. Their numbers included Walter Price and Colonel William E. Potts, who met again on a hill far different from the one they'd known in Claremore.
So here comes a Division G2 up the mountain, comes into my bunker, and who in the world is it but OMA's famous son, Bill Potts. He started talking to me about me being an OMA boy and went on, and finally he ran out of time. He said, I got to get out of here. I can get back to division headquarters. And the battalion exec said, doesn't the colonel wish to check the positions? And Potts says, walks over and slaps me on the back and says, I think this piece of ground's in good hands, and left. That's something you couldn't buy for $1 million.
Back home, OMA continued its mission of instilling military discipline in its young men, which meant the new cadets still had to endure a rabbit period. It may have been shortened from a year to a semester, but it was still the most intense stretch most young cadets had ever experienced.
He now begins the training program meted out by his superior officers and non-coms of the new cadet detail. This detail of old cadets initiates the new cadet into the military life he is to lead at OMA.
We had the duck walk, and I'm sure you know what duck walking is, with our hands behind our head like this, that whole drill field, and that is like a mile.
You'd have to stop every time an old man, as we call them, the non-commissioned or the officers, and brace up against the wall and hold your chin in and hold your belly in and stand there rigid as they walk past, and then you could resume your trip to the bathroom or wherever you had to go.
And as we got older and matured, we used to laugh because Colonel Ledbetter spent time and fortune getting parents to send their kids up here, and the Cadet Corps spent just as much time and maybe a little more effort trying to run them off.
For many cadets, the hell of having been a rabbit was counterbalanced by the heaven of OMA's formal dances, with entertainment from many of the top bands of the 1950s.
Well, the two that I can remember were Stan Kenton and Louis Armstrong.
Invitations to a formal dance at the field house are frequently issued to the OAO. And that's cadet slang for his one and only. Yes, the formal dance on the hill is a real affair.
It was easy to get dates for the big balls, you know.
It was a case where most kids couldn't go to because they couldn't afford those name bands, but it was a lot of fun. It was a big part of our life.
It taught us how to dress up, taught us how to be in a formal situation and interact with people, and I think it was a growth experience as well as just a wonderful opportunity again to enjoy your parents and the date they brought up for you. So yeah, the military balls were a memorable part of my experience here also.
Between the extremes of the rapid ordeals and the formal dances lay the everyday life of an OMA cadet, much of which was spent in the classroom.
The sciences are especially emphasized in the Academy High School courses. 2 full years of science, including chemistry classes like this one, are required before graduating.
I wasn't one of the top scholars, but was kind of a mediocre student, and wouldn't have been, even a mediocre student had it not been for the small classes and extra instruction.
Although many junior colleges had ROTC programs, OMA was one of only 3 in the nation to be designated as an honor school. This meant that the school was able to nominate candidates to West Point, Annapolis, and the Air Force Academy. The West Point of the Southwest held on to that title until the end. In order to keep it, the cadets had to undergo a rigorous inspection each year, known as a war board.
Regular Army people would come to our campus and check us out and see how our ROTC program was going along, you know. And that was a program that you eventually, if you finished and got a degree from college, you could become a second lieutenant in the service.
After the demands of studies in ROTC, what little time a cadet had left could be filled with a variety of extracurricular activities, from band and drill team to sports.
I was in the band for 4 years. Played the bass drum for Captain Kelly.
One of our most outstanding organizations is the famous military band. This group has won statewide acclaim for its ability to perform spectacular drills while playing.
And I thought I had a very important job because I had to set the pace for all of our parades. And we played parades, you know, in Tulsa and Oklahoma City and Enid and many other cities. And we were a small band, but we were loud.
Although his music was also loud, a cadet corps commander named Gene Croce pioneered a new sound on the Hill. A country singer who performed at OMA's annual Cadet Capers, Croce changed his style after a fellow cadet played him a record by a new hillbilly cat named Elvis.
He was doing Baby Let's Play House. And man, it blew me away. Oh man, that's what started me. So I did Baby Let's Play House and Forgot to Remember to Forget on the Cadet Capers. Instead of doing country, I did Elvis. And just something got into me. I guess just like into Elvis, I just had to move. I couldn't just stand there and play, you know. People clapped and you know, got into it. When the lights went on, all the people came. I mean, the whole audience. They all gathered around me and wanted autographs.
Gene Croce went on to be Tulsa's first rock and roll star, leaving the Hill on weekends to perform on television and play before audiences full of screaming fans. And it all started at OMA. The Academy produced another entertainer who would go on to international fame. Matthew Braun's chosen form of entertainment was writing fiction about the American West, and he did it so well. There are currently more than 40 million copies of his books in print.
Matt Braun and I worked together on the OMA Guidon. Matt and I both also worked on the Cadet.
Another outstanding achievement of the Corps accomplished at free time during the year is the publication of the school yearbook, the Cadet, and the monthly school paper, the Guidon.
And Matt was a prolific writer. Right from the get-go, everybody knew that he had a real talent for writing.
Outstanding cadets like these were a source of pride, not only to OMA, but to the city of Claremore.
While the city of Claremore realizes full well that the Academy is a state-owned institution designed to serve the state as a whole, it is indeed proud of the fact that OMA is located at Claremore.
Through the years, however, some of the town boys would regard the cadets on the Hill with something other than pride.
They did not like us because we were taking some of their girlfriends away from them.
A bunch of them decided to come up and raid the Hill one Halloween night. Well, that was in my rabbit year, so I wasn't really that much involved at it, but they brought us all down to look at them after they had captured them and tied them to chairs.
So then later on, they decided they would have sentries set up around the campus, and they issued them M1 rifles. No ammunition, of course. But one guy happened to have a round of .30 caliber ammunition, and he put it in his rifle. and he fired it. Nobody would have known who it was or where it came from, except he happened to have a tracer, and they saw where it came from. And he got in trouble. And so they never had put sentries out with M1 rifles again after that.
Some of that animosity may have been diffused in 1957, when OMA began offering night school classes. Now, for the first time, a student could take classes on the Hill without having to become a cadet, and local cadets, nicknamed day dogs, could live at home and commute to campus, as long as they wore uniforms and met the requirements of the ROTC program.
That was really a great deal because you could have the best of both worlds. I could go up, get all my basics out of the way, take the ROTC programs, be in uniform, and after it was all over, hop in my car and come on home.
Other local boys, however, opted for the whole program.
The ROTC program was the main reason that I came to Oklahoma Military Academy, so I was very impressed with it. It was run by full-time regular Army personnel, and I thought I would get a better perspective of what ROTC and the Army was about because it was a military school.
But how much longer could OMA continue to be a military school? In 1960, a Blue Ribbon Committee recommended that the academy be converted to a co-educational junior college, much to the chagrin of Colonel Ledbetter, who continued to beat the bushes for new recruits. Sometimes he found himself with tough selves.
And I really didn't want to come up here, and I was, like many of the cadets, needed to be here, had no direction, wasn't in good physical shape, was making poor grades. So I made a last stand with Colonel Homer Ledbetter, and as we were leaving, I looked at him and as we were shaking hands, and I said, "I'm not going to your damn school." And I spent the whole 6 years here, and it made me a better man.
The 1960s blew in on winds of change, but even as strange new social forces swirled through the country, buffeting the old ways of life, the West Point of the Southwest resolutely stuck to its guns, maintaining traditions begun more than 4 decades earlier.
When I arrived here, one of the first things that happened is you become a rabbit, and therefore you get rid of all your civilian clothes and they put you on fatigues. And the next thing that happens is you get a haircut, which I didn't know I was going to get a complete cut. And that was the first time I saw my father cry.
When my parents left me off and I was in those fatigues and I had a bald head and they drove around the corner and I realized I was alone. And I went into the little closet and shut the door and started crying my eyes out.
I can still recall my first morning waking up and thinking, where am I? Who is that? What is this? And it actually took me a little bit to orient myself to realize I'm at Oklahoma Military Academy.
I remember writing a letter to my mom, actually, and she said, and I told her, I said, well, there's rumors we're going back to the old rabbit period, and if that happens, we're going to be dead meat up here.
It was a camaraderie as a rabbit. Everyone helped each other, but it was tough. You had to memorize what they call the poop sheet, and we memorized all these different rules and regulations, and we exercised, and we ran everywhere, and we squared our meals, but it was something that everyone did.
Not all of OMA's traditions were influenced by the institution. The cadets proved that they could be creative and resourceful.
The cadets also find time to produce their own school review called Cadet Capers. This production is written and produced by the cadets for the entertainment of their parents, friends, and the general public.
It was kind of a variety show. And we didn't have any girls, though. So some of the cadets would have to dress up like girls to be in the chorus line, and that was always funny. And we'd have little skits and things like that. And we'd always have a big crowd for them, and people really did enjoy them.
I was a cheerleader, had been a cheerleader since my junior year in high school. Well, that 6th year, it was my turn. I mean, it was our turn, our class, to lead. And I knew we had a junior college football team, and so I was looking for a car. I wanted the cheerleaders to have a car, but Barry Grable found a hearse. So I went down there and plopped down $25. It was used as a shod car for horses, and we got that hearse fixed. Our first road trip, we had a flat tire. We weren't there at the game on time, and the players would not play without the hearse. They took 30-yard penalties because they wouldn't start the game. We rolled in, the siren blaring. We had a smoke machine in there and fogged up the whole field. That hearse and the cheerleader tradition went on and on and on.
The tradition of throwing brass into the lake was primarily for the graduating officers.
The graduating officer performs another simple ceremony, that of kissing his insignia of rank goodbye and throwing it over the wall to the bottom of Lake Douglas.
And the whole idea was, hey, we made the whole course. We did it.
The cadets knew they had to give their all and be committed and engaged every day they lived on the hill. Luckily for them, they had plenty of role models.
The instructors, Captains Lashbaugh, Bouchon, Roberts, Epperson, all memorable for me and all very helpful.
And the professors would come in the evening and help you. If you needed weekend help, they would help you. And your fellow cadets would help you, maybe writing term papers to help you out.
I think that the school taught me discipline. It taught me, of course, it was very deeply ingrained, courage, honor, loyalty, and to be a man of your word.
As the 60s wore on, America found itself increasingly entangled in another war. And once again, Oklahoma Military Academy prepared its young men to serve for the greater good of the country.
The whole time I was in the military, it was never seemed to be that tough. I mean, there were tough times and some dangerous times and that sort of thing, but for the most part, I felt as though I had already been there and done that before, and it was just another variation of it.
May of '68, I was wounded twice and I was awarded the Silver Star. I think it's significant that as I look back over my OMA years, the maturity that was developed, the leadership skills that they implied, the courage that they gave us, and the maturity that they gave us allowed me to do the things that I needed to do when I was placed in a hostile situation in Vietnam.
Despite the nation's need for new recruits, the number of OMA's full-time cadets dwindled, and pressure increased to turn OMA into a non-military school. And even as the world around it changed, the West Point of the Southwest continued to hold on to its unique customs and culture. Psychedelic sounds, love-ins, and freakouts might be going on elsewhere. But on the Hill, live music still meant formality, pomp, and ceremony.
You're in your Class A's, girl in her best prom-like dress on your arm, marching. I mean, there's a sense of elegance, a sense of formality that I think was special to everybody that participated.
The uniforms, the glitter of the brass, the shining of the sabers was more than some girls could take.
For some years, Colonel Homer Ledbetter had been dealing with his own challenges, especially from state leaders who thought OMA had outlived its usefulness as a military school. Although he never gave any specific reasons for his retirement in 1964, after serving as president for 16 years, those challenges surely hastened his departure. Colonel Ledbetter's successor was Major General and West Point graduate John F. Smoller. He would last until 1968, fighting to keep his military school afloat against the battering swells of political and social pressures. In the summer of 1965, OMA opened its campus to female day students, attracting almost 50 young women. There were also women attending night school, and in 1968, OMA enrolled its first full-time female students.
They were allowed to start taking junior college classes in preparation for the changeover to what became Claremore Junior College after 1971. So it kind of changed the perception of what OMA was. It wasn't the stuffy military school anymore.
By then, Colonel John E. Horn had become OMA's president. He was the first and only cadet to return to the Hill in order to run the academy. Colonel Horn inherited a far different institution than the one he had attended as a young man. By 1969, his second year as president, only about 50 junior college enrollees were cadets living on campus, about 1/10 of the total college population.
Everybody was an equal until you went to drill, and there was about maybe a half a dozen of the officers or drill instructors that seemed to enjoy the military discipline more than the day students.
In addition to the social and political factors, the changing nature of the campus brought financial stresses as well. OMA had always received much of its funding from room and board, uniforms, and other cadet expenses. Now those funds were disappearing.
The first year, the 69-70 school year, we knew it was coming, but no one seemed to think too much about it. It was just pretty much business as usual. That last year, 70-71, especially the final semester, I think it was on everyone's mind. There was a genuine sadness, I think, among the Corps of Cadets.
It all came to a head in the spring of 1971, when Colonel Horn attended a meeting in Oklahoma City, called by the State Chancellor for Higher Education, who read a recommendation that OMA be closed. That's when Colonel Horn knew it was over.
So my wife had driven me up there. I read her this message. I guess I cried from about Chandler to Sepulveda. Just broke my heart. First alumni president, and I was going to close the place. Well, that was in the spring of '71, and it closed right after graduation. Well, that's how quick we pulled the flag down. And I had to call another cadet. I didn't think I could do it, and I didn't want the cadets to witness that. I didn't think it was good for them.
It was a very, very proud time, but a very sad time. I think if you get them to admit it, a lot of these supposedly tough military guys probably had tears in their eyes when that was happening.
On that spring day in 1971, Claremore Junior College was born.
It was a smooth transition, and there wasn't any, this is a lack of, this term's not very good, but there were not a run of 5,000 hippies didn't show up and have a love-in out on the drill field or anything like that. It was just a lot of kids that were going, you know, all in the same boat going to school here, and now there were girls that lived in the dorm, and there was a girls' basketball team.
But OMA did not die, thanks in great part to the early efforts of a few former cadets and to new CJC President Dr. Richard Mosier, who designated college administrator Dr. Danette Boyle to work with the fledgling Oklahoma Military Academy Alumni Association.
I found that so many of the men that I met and got acquainted with were extraordinary, is the only way I could say it. To find that we had 10 generals and CEOs of companies, and you look at the gamut, and they were across the board, all across the nation.
In 1974, Elder and a few others sat down and hand-addressed 2,300 invitations to an alumni dance.
The goal was to make the alumni, first of all, know that we were there, and to make them know how badly we wanted them to come back.
That was the first reunion, which took place on the Claremore Junior College campus. And as that institution went through several changes, ultimately becoming Rogers State University, it continued to host the annual get-togethers, giving cadets from all around the country a place to gather and reminisce.
They're not making any more OMA cadets. So I think what we're doing here and the K Memorial, this is a legacy for our children, for our children's children.
OMA alumni from the 1930s, report.
Members of the 1930s, all present and accounted for, sir.
Thank you. OMA alumni from the 1940s, report.
All members of the decade of the 1940s are present and accounted for, sir.
The ranks of cadets grow thinner each year, and time increasingly extracts its toll on the ones left to carry on. But still they come to the Hill, drawn by a force greater than themselves, by an unbreakable link from their collective past. These men, they are OMA.
Everybody's experience is a little different here, but the end result is the same, that they love this place, they love the people they were here with.
Courage, loyalty, and honor. You choose the right way, even if it's harder, rather than the wrong way because it's easier.
Whatever success I have accomplished, I owe it to OMA.
I am forever grateful for the opportunity to have gotten to come to OMA.
This school is my home, and these guys are all my brothers.
My life, it is what it is today because of OMA.